You don't need to see anything.
I don't know how to get us off of there.
I don't know why. Twilight Tour. It was started by the Nicole Historical Society and Diane Baker. So, I'm hoping everybody has a program. They are available up here, as well as a postcard. A couple housekeeping items. We have a porta potty beside the green shed if anybody needs to use that. That's a new feature as of this last year. Thank you, residents. I also want to welcome you to another event where we get to honor our past pioneers of Duval Cemetery. We have Duval Historical representing.
I'm working on it. This I know how.
I want you to know that this is a moving theater. That means that you will have to get up and walk if you want to hear the entire thing. But our actors do know how to project when necessary. And we are doing our best to represent the families here that are buried here at the Novelty Hills Cemetery. So with further ado, we want to bring people in. We are going to be starting with the Burens. We will then travel south, and then we will travel east. Our last stop will be the Van Hollies. Are there any questions before we begin tonight's event? How long is the event? Well, I would hope that we could wrap it up in an hour.
Before it starts.
Before it starts. Absolutely. I also want to, before we begin, I forgot a couple things. I want to introduce you to a couple new features at the cemetery. As if you've been here before, we have a new trellis that will be planted in the spring. We're finished with the woodwork. We're going to hang the wood next week and then plant in the spring. Over here, the raised wall is our new infant area, where we designated as a board last year that we will have infants only buried in that sectional. And then behind the vehicles on the tree line, you will see a round platform, and that is not where people park their helicopter. Okay? I know, sorry. I do want to, if you look at the postcard, we are getting niches brought into the cemetery. And so that will be coming in September. And we do have a pre-sale on niches if anybody's interested through the end of the year. And our contact information is on the postcard. And with that, I want to welcome you to our 10th yearly Love Stories Twilight Tour. Cell phones, silent or off. Thank you.
All right, everybody, gather around.
You got it? You got it now? Okay.
Are there any Byrne family members in the audience tonight?
I don't know how to get rid of us.
Well, before we get started, I'd like to make sure that you all are clear on the pronunciation of our last name, Byrne. The H is silent, as in herb. Ray and Tova Byrne.
What a lovely headstone this is. My son-in-law really outdid himself again. On the back is the song that I sing to my husband, Ray. This guy right here. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. It was a long 2.5 years after my honey went over the rainbow in 2017. You never know what to expect, as I was 1.5 years older than Ray. After a certain age, it doesn't matter. True love is ageless. Let's step back to my beginning, as we really don't know each other yet. I was born in Centralia, Washington, in January 9th,
I don't know where it went.
1926, to Osmond and Irene Hodge. I attended Centralia schools and graduated from Centralia High School in 1943. I wonder how many people will be at our 80th high school reunion
What's it doing?
next year, actually. I went to Centralia Junior College for 2 years during World War II, and then to the University of Washington, where I earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in English and met Ray for the first time. I knew that Ray was someone special. In 1945, men came back from the war and attended college.
That's as
with
big as I
us
can
in
get it.
Blytheville. It seemed like there were 10 men for every woman on campus. You could date every night of the week if you wished. It was during this time that my friend Jessie asked me to join her on a double date, and I refused. Regardless, 2 young men came to the cooperative house door and asked for me. I was upset that Jessie had sent them, so I stomped downstairs to say, "Go away." However, when I got to the bottom of the stairs, I stopped as I saw Ray, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not quite ready yet." And I ran upstairs and changed my clothes to go roller skating. It was a match. After graduation, I moved to the town of Ferndale to teach. Ray and I continued to see each other occasionally, but our communication dwindled and eventually stopped. Soon, Ray was drafted and sent to Korea, and Ray and I went our separate ways. After teaching in Ferndale for 4 years, I married Fred H. Webster, and we returned to Centralia, the Grand Mound area to be exact. I was very happy to live closer to my immediate family. I was able to teach west of Grand Mound, Rochester High School, and at Maple Lane. I loved being a mom and actively contributing with Cub Scouts and Campfire Girls. I was already a writer, so I formed a group of actors, calling them the Myanmars. For many years, I directed plays, both on Lima Prairie and at the Centralia Evergreen Theater. Well, here's where I'll pause and let Ray tell you some of his story.
Oh, Tova. It's quite a character, isn't she? Now you can see where her love of plays came from. Like it says here, I was born September 9th, 1927 in Oklahoma City. On my 13th birthday, our family moved to Seattle, and that's where I graduated from Queen Anne High School at the age of 16. I enrolled and began my studies at the University of Washington, but World War II interrupted my stay at the UW. So I joined the Navy where I continued my studies in the Naval Pilots Program. I earned my honorable discharge from the Navy in 1947, and I went back to the University of Washington to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree for engineering and zoology. It was this second go around at the university where I met Tova in 1949. Like she mentioned, we went our separate ways, met and married different people. I guess you could say she sent me out to be trained by another to come home and be perfect for her later. After graduation, I bought and ran a sawmill in Stillwater, Washington, called what else? The Duval Sawmill. Oh, and then the Korean War began. I was drafted into the Army, where I served in the 25th Medical Battalion, running a dental aid station. The sawmill was managed by a friend of mine while I was away. With my service complete in 1954, I went back to Seattle, where my 35-year career at Boeing started. In 1956, I sold the sawmill and began working primarily in program management as an aerospace engineer. Some of the projects I worked on were the B-52 Stratofortress, the Hickam and Sage projects, AWACS radar, hydrofoil, and the space shuttle. I retired from Boeing in 1987 at the age of 60. In 1978, while I was still working at Boeing, I built Duval Village Mobile Home Park virtually by hand. I operated the park for nearly 35 years before selling it in 2012 to the residents. I've always been a history and railroad buff and like to collect old things. I'm known around Old Town Duval as the man who purchased the old 1912 Milwaukee Railroad Depot building. I eventually restored it and donated it to the city of Duval in 2004. The building has been located right next to the rail bed, but the city moved it to Depot Park near the police station. Oh, I could go on all day, but let's talk about us.
So you may be wondering how I got here. Well, I mean, not here, but after my first husband passed away, I received part of a lottery jackpot from my uncle as an inheritance. And I decided to visit my friend Jessie. You remember her, my blind date friend from college who'd moved to Israel. Before the visit, Jessie asked me to locate a few friends that she'd lost track of, and Ray was one of them. I tracked Ray down and discovered, amongst other things, that he'd gotten divorced. Ray asked me to contact him when I returned from my trip. I did, and in 1986, we got married. Ray was just beginning to fight to preserve the 1888 Doherty House as a historic landmark and museum when I arrived in Duval. If it wasn't for Ray's efforts and influence with local politicians, we wouldn't have a museum at the Doherty Farmstead on Cherry Valley Road. My interest in history and genealogy led me to naturally join Ray as a leader in the Duval Historical Society. When Ray's museum efforts were eventually successful, he worked on the outbuildings and I jumped right in. A small group of women and I took on the job of cleaning, repairing, furnishing, and decorating the interior of the Doherty House. I have to say, Ray and I were a powerhouse together. When I was in my 80s, the Duval Historical Heritage Festival was short of volunteers. So I called on 4 of my children to come from as far away as Centralia to help us out. Like today, many of the volunteers here in Duval, we were taught by our elders to be of service. And I guess that's where my kids learned the term voluntold. In 2012, we were honored as the city's first Volunteers of the Year. In 2013, we served as Grand Marshals in the Duval's centennial celebration. We felt so honored to represent our town on Duval's 100th anniversary. We even have a street named after us in Duval that leads to the historic depot that we donated to the city. Back to my love of theater, it led me to direct many plays in the Carnation Duval area. In my mid-80s, I decided to direct one more play at the Snow Valley Senior Center called The Warrior's Husband. We had a cast of about 25 people, many who'd never been on stage before. It was an immense undertaking, and we pulled it off brilliantly, despite a prop collapsing and a substitution for a main actor who had a heart attack the night before the performance. Ray?
True story. As I said before, Tova and I both have a love for history and stories about the old days. With Tova doing most of the editing, we helped publish 8 books for the Duval Historical Society, including Digging Duval's Past, The Wagon Wheel, and Just Cogitating. I understand those books lasted longer than I have, and they can be found for sale on that table right over there. Work of all types was fun for me, and in my free time, I tended up to 200 cattle, cut wood, baled hay, raised fields of corn, had a vegetable garden, and performed the various jobs associated with running an 80-acre farm. You know, that property is still alive and thriving with help from Leo, the gatekeeper, and my son, Chet. Our place is located just east of the Red Barn, pictured on this year's Chamber Business Directory. You may not see the White House with a red metal roof as you're buzzing north, but just north of the new creek bed, you can see our rustic moss decor farm truck camouflaged within the trees. Over the years, hard work paid off, and you know, Tova and I didn't need a lot, so we were happy to help out where we could. I guess it's okay now to talk about our donations to the Senior Center in downtown Carnation, the Duval Historical Society, the Duval Cultural Commission, and we are most proud of the college scholarships we're able to fund for Cedar Crest High School students. As Tova mentioned, we also donated the public restrooms in Depot Park. I suppose we donated a fair amount of our time too. Some people may have appreciated it more than others. I was chair of the Duval Planning Commission for 20 years and was an active leader in the Snow Valley Senior Center. Tova also volunteered at the Senior Center. I think she was probably on just about every volunteer group here. The Historical Society, Duval Cultural Commission, and the Civic Club, just to name a few. We attended almost every city council meeting we could and got to know our King County Council and Washington state government officials. We made many a trip to Olympia to meet with politicians. Finally, I ran out of gas, and at the age of 90, I peacefully passed away January 26, 2017. My final words to you all as I fade back to be with my beautiful bride is remember your civic and community duty as you drive up Main Street and see the sign that reads Northwest Burren Way. Well, Tova, would you kindly wrap this up?
I have to tell you, I'm so grateful that I was able to spend my last 30 years here in this town. Finally, at the age of 93, I made my final performance, passing away peacefully in our home in Duval on May 21st, 2019. Thank you for supporting my love for theater and my love for the town of Duval as I make my final curtsy.
That's my husband Milo. He was the fiddle player here in Duval. My name is Sina Virginia Ballard. I was born in Marion County, Iowa, where I was on a farm until I was 31 years old. At that time, I came out to Seattle to be with my brother Clinton, and I first worked as a laundress. But by 1892 or 3, I came to Duval, and I became one of the first school teachers here. Where the Seattle Waterworks building is where I taught school. But I wasn't there long because I met Milo. And in those days, you did not work and have kids at the same time if you were a woman. So in 1895, we got married. In 1896, we had our first daughter, Mary Louise, right there. And then we had, the following year, we had John Ballard Clark in 1896. We had Harrison Franklin in 1897. And in 1891, Burrell came along, and he's here too. The four of us lived in a cedar shack, not too far from where the Thirds had their property. I loved being a mom, and I loved having my kids nearby. And however, in 1918, I lost my Milo to the Spanish flu, and it was just me and the kids. But they stayed with me, and I lived with them. Finally, at the age of 97, in 1957, I passed away in Everett and went to join my Milo.
My name is Milo Curtis Clark. I was born in 1863 in Trumbull County, Ohio. I stayed with my family until I came west by wagon as a young man. When I got to Cherry Valley, I purchased 160 acres at the price of $500 from a homestead. The property went from near the Novelty School, which is now the Seattle Water Department right away, over to where the Rayburns live, which is north of Crow Clemens Creek. That's where the culvert work was done in 2021. The land extended back to the pole line, including the Chris Lotus place, and then down to the Snoqualmie River. When I first got the land, I lived in a split cedar shack under the cherry trees. In the evening, I played the fiddle, like I did for you here tonight, for the local gatherings in the area. After I married the school teacher, my beautiful wife, Ballard, in 1895, we built a two-story home for our 4 children. In early 1900s, my sons and I built the large Clark barn. It's the red one on the west side of the street and pictured on the cover of Duval Chambers 2022 business directory. It was very well known for its size because it was built with some 48-foot cedar beams with less than 2 inches of variance from side to side. In 1900, I was part of the committee to find this here cemetery. We needed a plot of dry ground because the Cherry Valley Pioneer Cemetery, Doherty Farmstead, had a very high water table. Most burials in Pioneer Cemetery included bailing water out of the hole just prior to placing the body down. See, the minister and the land custodian would arrange the burial time for the procession to leave the church, given Perkins, the gravedigger, time to bail out the grave before the procession arrived. This sort of arrangement wasn't going to last, so a new cemetery had to be found. Our committee searched high and low, suggestions, invitations, test holes, but always a trickle of water appeared. Then a strange thing happened. Another Duval pioneer by the name of Andrew Peterson had a dream. In it, he saw a huge windfall, and the stump hole where the cedar had once stood was full of pure dry gravel. The dream was so vivid that the next morning, after chores were done, he struck out through the woods up Novelty Hill. He looked and looked, and suddenly there it was, the same exact spot that was in a dream. We were all summoned to the spot, and the test hole was put down. The test hole was filled with sand and gravel, but no water. Our quest had ended right here on this side. In 1916, my wife and I paid a contractor $1,900 to build a large three-story home just south of Cove Clemens Creek. It was a fine, stately home, and is still standing today. But in 1918, not long after the house was completed, I was taken by the Spanish flu. In these parts, it was known as Le Gripe, and I'm not the only one in the cemetery that succumbed to it. So many people died in Duval that the theater was used as a temporary morgue. But I'm proud of the work that I did here when I was alive. Some of my grandchildren and great-grandchildren still live in the area. The homes and barns that I built are mostly still standing. In fact, in 1940, long after I passed, one of the houses was even moved up the hill on skids to make way for progress. And I'm so proud the cemetery is still here, still visited, and still treasured to this day.
Are there any members of the Pickering family here with us tonight? There's a treasury of tales to tell about the years on the farm, but they are for another moment. If I were alive today, I would certainly agree with this song from which Mildred acquired her nickname Mickey. Mickey, pretty Mickey with your hair of raven hue and your smiling so beguiling. Can you blame anyone for falling in love with you? When the dancing daffodils bloom like trumpets announcing spring, they bring me tender and joyful memories of my sweet bride, Mildred. Although she loved many flowers, the daffodil is Mickey's favorite. I was born on July 17, 1900, right here in Novelty. It's this area right where we are right now. So at the time of my birth, my father, Alf, was 31, and my mother, Jeanette Pickering, was 26. I was the seventh child of 10, and I had 4 sisters and 5 brothers. In 1913, my dad leased out the Novelty Farm and moved the family to Chesaw, Washington. We boarded the train at Novelty, and the school let out so everyone could wave goodbye to us. Chesaw turned out to be a difficult place to farm. My brother Roy died there of typhoid fever at the age of 17. My mother, Jeanette, said that Chesaw is not a place, but a disease. On January 5th, 1917, our family moved back to the Novelty Farm from Chesaw. However, I stayed in Chesaw until May with my older brother, Lewis, to help farm. Returning home, one of my favorite activities in the late 1910s was to ride the train from Novelty to Duval for 10 cents and see a silent film at the Duval Theater. Yes, Lon Brown, Duval's first mayor, had a theater on Main Street. Also in that decade, our family unfortunately encountered another loss when my brother Lester passed away. To me, Lester is a hero. While the Great War, World War I, was raging in Europe, Lester made preparations to enlist in the military even before the United States officially declared war to join the fighting. He married Leila Thayer before he left for the war. In June 1917, Lester received his civil engineering diploma. And in the war, he was a lieutenant in an engineering company, leading his men through the red hell of machine gun fire when he was struck in the leg. He continued to advance, neglecting the advice of his fellow officers. He was eventually ordered to the hospital, where he almost recovered from the bullet wound when he fell victim to pneumonia. I redirected my sadness from his death into a passion for sports. And in 1919, I played for the Duval High School boys basketball team when we became champions of the Snoqualmie Valley. So you'll hear from Mildred in just a moment about how we met. But I can tell you that Mickey and I were married in Redmond, Washington on March 24th in 1928. I was 27 and she was 20. We lived for many years with my parents in the farmhouse at the bottom of Novelty Hill. We raised 4 children, Jeanette, John, Larry, and Earl. We worked hard over the years to build our barns and a house, which we finished around 1932. Soon after the buildings were finished, the dairy herd of Holsteins contracted tuberculosis and had to be destroyed. Thankfully, the government partially compensated us so that we could replace the cows. We purchased a Jersey herd because it was a little bit cheaper. In 1939, I was appointed to the King County Agricultural Stabilization and Conservation Committee, the ASCS. When World War II started, Mickey and I tried, unsuccessfully, to keep our Duval Japanese friends and neighbors, the Satos, from being sent to an internment camp. So sadly, many interned citizens lost everything. Here in Duval, the farming community held the Satos farm so that they could return to it after the camp. During the war, I served on the draft board committee for determining eligibility for the draft exemption. I passed judgment on the applications for draft deferment for farm workers. So also during that time period, on February 21st, 1943, our son Larry Allen was born in Seattle, Washington. So, and he still lives on the farm down the hill. So, continuing on, the next year, we also had, I lost my Larry, kind of. So, Mickey and I received some more good news the following year when our son Earl Leroy was born in Kirkland, Washington on November 28th, 1944. I remember, Larry, and you may remember this too, it was 1956, just before your 13th birthday, when you received a painful injury when a pitchfork went through your foot while filling. So, sorry about that, Larry. It was in 1964 when I was honored for 25 years of service to the King County ASCS. In addition to serving as chairman of the county committee, I was also a member of the King County Planning Commission as their farm representative, Citizens Council for Good Government, and the Washington State Dairy Federation. Soon after all those accomplishments, I decided to retire from farming with 80 head on our 120-acre farm. So I sold the cattle and retired. I lived a good retired life for 9 years. But on April 23rd, 1973, at the age of 72, I had a fall in our barn while working on our hay pulley system. Unfortunately, that is where I passed away. Then they moved me up here onto the hill. So once you leave here tonight and you head down the hill, look to the right and you'll see the white barn with green trim. That is where our family barn is still active today, holding community events and selling pumpkins and Christmas trees. So come visit our farm one of these seasons. It would really be a pleasure to see you there. Mickey.
I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodil, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, or off when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood. They flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils. William Wordsworth. Hello, I'm Mildred Pickering, but most everyone knows me as Mickey, and quite a few first graders from Cherry Valley Elementary School know me as Mrs. Pickering. I was born July 24th, 1907 in East Sound, Orcas Island, Washington, to John, age 33, and Grace King, age 36. I was the third child of four and had two sisters and one brother. In 1910, when I was still an infant, I immigrated to Canada with my parents and two sisters. My mother, Grace, was a Canadian citizen. We moved to Kamloops, British Columbia, which is where I spent the next 14 years of my life. I learned this Wordsworth poem while in elementary school in Kamloops when I was 10 years old. At the time, I did not know how special that flower and that poem would be to me. I attended a one-room schoolhouse and had to walk 3 miles to get to school. And you know what? That means I had to walk 3 miles to get home too. Because of the severe winters, I could only attend school until October. I returned to school typically in May when spring came around. We got a horse 4 years after moving to Kamloops, which meant I could attend school a little longer. When I was in 7th grade, the school was built closer and I began attending school full time. To qualify for high school, I had to pass state exams. I passed these tests, but there wasn't a high school close to where I lived, so I moved to Mount Vernon, Washington, to live with my aunt. During my first year in high school, I worked for my room and board. Then my folks moved to Redmond, and I was able to live with my family again for my sophomore, junior, and senior years. And I graduated from high school in 1926. Saturday nights during the 1920s were always filled with fun for us. We attended weekly dances in Duval, Novelty, Vincent, or even the Swiss Hall in Monroe. It was at the Novelty Dance Hall that we first met. My sister and brother were going to this dance over at Novelty, and I didn't want to go. I was still very young. I was just a sophomore in high school. I had no intention of going, but my mother thought it would work better if I went along too, so they kind of forced me into it. Well, my sister, she was the kind of person who's always full of fun, and she says to me at the dance hall, "Oh, I know somebody I'll bring over and introduce to you." She then brought Bernie over and introduced him to me. Bernie wanted to take me back to my home after the dance. I told him I lived so far away in Redmond, but that didn't seem to bother him. A few years went by, and we ended up getting married. We were the first couple to be married in the Redmond United Methodist Church, which still stands next to the old Redmond School, where I had just graduated a couple years earlier. It was to be a very simple wedding, and there was no money for flowers, but our friends and family secretly had something else in mind. Bernie and I were surprised as we entered the church to find flowers, lots of yellow daffodils. If there was one thing that everyone had growing, it was daffodils. Daffodils decorated the altar, and the linen-covered tables at the reception were covered with them too. It was such a wonderful surprise. In 1928, although now married, I needed to finish my schooling in Bellingham. Against the social norms of the day, Bernie tells me he does not want me to have any regrets and fully supports me returning to school to finish. I graduated in June 1928 from what now is Western Washington University with my teaching degree. Following graduation in 1928, I began teaching. These are happy tears. I began a teaching career that spanned nearly 5 decades, including my later years when I served as a teacher's aide. My first teaching job was in a 2-room schoolhouse in Stillwater, where I taught 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. Later, when the 6th through 8th grades were moved to Carnation, I taught first 5 grades at Stillwater. In 1935, during the Great Depression, I thought we had it relatively well because the farm could provide most of what we needed. By the 1950s, I was teaching kindergarten at Cherry Valley Elementary. I eventually moved to first grade, teaching school retiring in 1970. Although saddened by the unexpected passing of my beloved Bernie in 1973, I lived 3 more decades enjoying the time I could spend with my 4 children, Jeanette, John, Larry, and Earl. My 9 grandchildren at the age, my 9 grandchildren and 9 great grandchildren and my sister Evelyn. I passed away peacefully at the age of 99 on December 17, 2006, and it was fitting that my memorial service was held at the very same Redmond United Methodist Church where Vern and I were married so many years before.
Few more minutes, please. Are there any Van Hollies in the crowd? Oh, listen. Thank you. Okay, I think you got this. Welcome to our final resting place here in Novelty Hills Cemetery. I'm Frank Joseph Van Holly. I was born in 1919, right on the raging river, down in Carriston, just 5.5 miles south of modern Snoqualmie Ridge. Now that old town is just a few foundations buried in the deep woods. When I was 5 years old, my father, Hector, and my mother, Marie, in that area,
moved our family up here to Duval, and settled on Northeast Cherry Valley Road. I lived my entire life on that beautiful spread. I'm a lifelong member of Holy Innocents Catholic Church and remember catechism classes taught by Kate Doherty on her Cherry Valley Road farmstead home, now open on Sundays, Monday, May through September. There we go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ruby Rose Van Holly, and I met Frank at a dance in Monroe in the early 1940s. I'm not sure I would describe Frank as the life of the party, because when I first met him, he was so shy. I really didn't pay much attention to him, but Frank paid attention to me and came back to the next dance. I started looking forward to seeing him at those dance sessions. When my parents noticed I was talking about this Frank guy more and more, they asked to meet him. I asked Frank to come to the house so we would go to the next dance together. My folks thought he was a nice enough man, but really didn't expect any romance, and that this would all blow over. I announced to my parents that Frank asked me to marry him, and my mother went into shock. She couldn't understand and asked me not to marry him. 1, because he was a farmer. 2, he was Catholic. My mother made it sound as if he had some terminal illness, but I managed to calm her down. We were married July 5th, 1945. The honeymoon was great, but once we got back to the car, it had a flat, so Frank went for help. I was sure he had decided marriage was not for him because it took him a very, very long time to return. But he finally did. Frank was 26 and I 23.
Believe it or not, I'm a quiet, industrious man and have served as a volunteer firefighter. Back in the day, it seems like all the men served on the fire department, and I was even elected commissioner for the Department of Duval. I'm also a successful dairy farmer as well as a school bus driver. I hunted with my brother and then later with my sons to feed the family. Hunting was always in the fall, and I left Ruby and the kids in charge of all that milking. Of course, the powers always went out, and so Ruby really had her hands full with children, cows, and life.
We worked our way through 67 years of marriage, and we did a lot of celebrating along the way. I really enjoyed life on the farm and raising 7 children with Frank. With that many kids in the house, life was never boring. We had 4 beautiful children, and then 3 years passed, and God blessed us with twins. 11 years later, God gave me a gift of another son. My children were my salvation because they embraced me and this child with love and support.
Once I retired, I did some logging and some commercial fishing in Alaska, but that's not what I would really call retirement. After I officially retired, Ruby and I enjoyed traveling around in our motorhome and enjoying the family of friends along the way. Plus, we went to Switzerland, but not in the motorhome. People remember me as always having a ready smile and a quick laugh. I was never one to turn a party down. So when I was asked to be a ghost speaker here at this year's shindig, I couldn't resist and had to be a part of the fun.
I remember when our local newspaper, the Carnival Reporter, reported in their May 1st, 1958 edition that our 3-year-old son, John, was rushed to Monroe Hospital after a tailgate of a truck fell onto his head. The newspaper reported that it took 15 stitches to fix the wound on his head, and he was sporting a turban all that week. Thank goodness for Duval Historical Society's website, where we can look up all the retired newspapers of yesteryear. Their digitized newspapers go all the way to 1911. It's fun to read what was going on in Duval in those days. I must add, I never regretted marrying Frank, even though he was a Catholic.
The Northeast Cherry Valley road spread that I was raised on with my siblings has stayed in my family for 5 generations. I'm also very proud of my 2 sons that were in the military. One went to Vietnam and the other one was in the Seabees. My beloved Ruby passed away on April 17, 2012. 32 days later, I joined her on May 19th. Thanks so much for visiting us here for this year's Twilight Tour. How about a round of applause for Country Roni for putting all this together for us. If you ever want to see what we're up to, just come up anytime. Ruby and I will be right here, happy to see you.
Thank you all for being here and supporting local people, local history, local loves, the emotional aspect that, you know, today we are creating history because, you know, you guys, one of you, where's Nora? Nora might be representing me in 100 years. You know, so we're Duval Historical creating history today to remember for tomorrow. And that's what we like to do. And I want to really thank the board of directors. If you're a board of director for Novelty, would you please raise your hand? We'd love to give you a round of applause. And I also recognize one of our contributors, Tom. Raise your hand. He helps donated money for the landscaping at the entrance and our first bench that we have in the back corner. Thank you again. And if anybody will want to get pictures of family with actors too, so please don't leave if you're a fan. Thank you.